All right, afternoon, everyone. I am so excited that so many people are joining us today. I'm here on stage with two seasoned professionals and climate advocates, Aida Curtis of Curtis & Rogers Studio and Dalton Lavoie of Stantec. And we're really excited to jump into today's content after we go through like 500 housekeeping notes. The first one is, if you are tracking credits for Florida licensure, please be sure to sign in on the attendance sheet in the back. If you're tracking professional development hours, make sure you got your badge scanned at the front, and you can access your PDH attendance record through the conference on the mobile app. After the conference, you can find your PDH attendance records on the ASLA conference website because you'll be able to access your records. You will be asked to complete evaluation forms for the session you have attended. All right, so during this session, we've got about 90 minutes. We're going to try to talk at you for an hour or less to leave plenty of time for Q&A at the end. We're going to try to cover how landscape architects can influence and shape public policy, especially as related to climate, how to better leverage the skills that we already have to communicate ideas about the built environment, how to find resources for better design to draw down greenhouse gases, and how models of climate justice can be incorporated into our practices. So like I said, about 25, 30 minutes for convo, so take good notes so we can have a really robust conversation. A couple more housekeeping slides. This presentation is protected by US and international copyright laws. Reproduction, distribution, display, and use of this presentation without written permission of the speakers is prohibited. And the views and opinions expressed by presenters are our own and do not necessarily represent those of ASLA. ASLA disclaims the responsibility for the use and application of information presented in this education session. All right, so we're here today to talk about advocacy. And I want to begin by really centering us on the urgency of the topic at hand by reviewing this number, 1.5 degrees Celsius. So this number gets referenced all over climate literature. It's in the Paris Agreement. They're talking about it right now in Egypt at COP27. It's about the equivalent of 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit if you don't speak Celsius. And this is the number that climate scientists agree that we should not surpass in warming if we want to avoid catastrophic systems failure. Things like widespread crop failure and hunger, massive human migrations, loss of access to fresh water, things that have already started happening that will just continue to escalate if we can't stay below this number. So 1.5 degrees establishes our carbon budget, how much carbon we can put into the atmosphere and still stay below this threshold. So if you're a numbers person, it's about 2.8 trillion metric tons. But more important than the number, it's important to know that we've already used 90% of this carbon budget in historic emissions, meaning we've already baked in about 1.3 degrees of warming. So here we are at the end of 2022. We've just got about 1/10 of the carbon budget remaining. But if we emit CO2 at the same rate that we did in the last decade, we are going to overshoot our carbon budget in less than 7 years. I look at a lot of faces in the audience, myself included. We're still going to be practicing in 7 years. We're going to have to figure out how to practice pretty radically different very quickly. And here's the really distressing part to me. Our current global commitments to reduce carbon have us on track to actually raise our carbon emissions by the end of the decade instead of lower them. So if you look at this graph, essentially the lesson here is that in the 20 or 30 previous years of voluntary commitments, we have actually stalled on climate action, increasing our carbon emissions. 2022 is set to be the highest carbon emission year to date. So we now have to do more and do it faster if we want to have a shot at staying under 1.5. And just to make sure this message is very, very clear, this is the graph of what we need to be doing. By the end of the decade, 2030, we need to reduce emissions by 50 to 65% globally. And by 2040, we need to reach zero emissions. Not net zero, zero emissions. It's a pretty big task that we have ahead of us. And I think that sometimes it can be really hard not to just throw up our hands and be like, well, we've already baked in 1.3 degrees. What can we really do? But even the difference between a 1.5 degree warming scenario and a 2 degree warming scenario is very radically different. And we have a lot to fight for. Just picking out some of these examples on the screen, let's take heat waves. So the world population exposed to severe heat waves at least once every 5 years in a 1.5 degree warming scenario, it's about 14% of the planet. That jumps to 37% of the planet under a 2 degree scenario. Or we're here in California, Mediterranean climate. When you look at the area burned in wildfires in the average Mediterranean summer, 1.5 degrees of warming, the area increases to 41%, or increases by 41%, and that jumps to 62% in 2 degree warming. So we have already baked in a lot, but there's still a lot of margin and a lot that we can fight for in our industry. So finally, some good news. Landscape architects can help. We can. And it's really important that we do in order to contribute to this climate positive future that we all dream of. And a zero carbon future is not as far away as it once seemed. We just have to have the collective willpower to execute it. And there's lots of information out there on specific ways that our projects and office operations can accomplish this. A lot of that is going to be covered in the Climate Action Guide that's going live tomorrow, so really encourage everybody to download that. For example, this graphic is from the Pathfinder tool. If you've never used the Pathfinder tool to track your carbon emissions, consider this your invitation. It's a great tool, especially for concept phase and iterating to essentially work toward lower embodied carbon in our designs. But even if we succeed in being a zero carbon field by 2040, we're not going to collectively achieve the goals to keep the Earth below 1.5 degrees Celsius warming. And that's why we're here today. It's up to us to also advocate outside of the walls of our offices for better policies, to roll up our sleeves and get dirty in grassroots organizing, to contact policymakers. I think this is not something that's been natural to a lot of designers. We're really comfortable behind the drafting table and kind of being in the background. But in order to really be climate advocates, like we like to think that we are, we have to be better at getting out there. So that's what we're going to talk about. This is a special session because the Climate Action Plan doesn't actually drop until tomorrow morning, but we're going to get a little preview of a piece of it, this advocacy session in the field guide. So if you haven't heard the hype, the Climate Action Plan is going to guide the development of policies and programs of the society through 2040, trying to push our field to be a zero carbon field by 2040. It was developed in a direct response to members and chapters asking for more guidance. And there's a whole session on CAP on Sunday, which I really encourage you to attend. Ask me or Aida or Madeline. A lot of people in this room have on these orange pins, ask me about the Climate Action Plan. But for today, really all you need to know is that the plan is composed of two parts. There's the Climate Action Plan, which is really aimed at ASLA and what the society can do. And then this blue one is the Climate Action Field Guide. And that's really oriented for us as practitioners. So it has really direct advice for how we can lower our embodied carbon and sequester more carbon and be better advocates in related to climate advocacy. So both the Climate Action Plan and the Field Guide are organized around these three topics. There's practice, equity, and advocacy. And under these three topics, there's 6 key initiatives, which mimic the key initiatives of the ASLA Climate Action Plan that ASLA signed last year. So those initiatives are carbon drawdown and climate resilience underneath practice. That's where you're going to get a lot of the nuts and bolts about how to lower the embodied emissions and boost the sequestration of our projects. There is cultural empowerment and climate agency under the equity goal. And then what we're here to talk about today, climate leadership under advocacy. So this section of the field guide is really intended to demystify advocacy for landscape architects, and it presents sort of a menu of options so that you can kind of read yourself into different ideas, different ways of getting involved. I think the best way to be an advocate is to kind of match up your skill set and your interests with an action that aligns for sustained commitment to being an advocate. And it's going to look a lot of different ways, and it has to look a lot of different ways for us to be effective as a field. So when you open up the field guide tomorrow morning after you download it at 9:30 a.m., it's going to look something kind of like this. Each initiative has key climate actions you can take, and they're broken down by the type of actor taking the action. So there's you as an individual, you as a firm or an organization, and you with your community. So looking at the climate leadership actions, we suggest, these are a few of kind of the highlights of the top 4 for each one. One of the easiest ways to get involved individually is to sign up for ASLA's iAdvocate tool. This is like very base bottom line. If you haven't signed up, go ahead and do it. When you sign up, you put in your address so that when relevant legislation is up on a federal level, you'll get an email pre-filled with the senators and representative related to your district so that you can contact them directly. And I think it's a good way to kind of get a shorthand bill tracking, essentially, for landscape architects. If you're already signed up for it, you might have gotten an email about, notes, the Urban Heat Mitigation Act, which hasn't yet been voted on. So when the new congressional session is up, we're going to be contacting our senators and representatives to fight for this legislation, which is essentially unlocking new funding for heat mitigation measures, like things like very basic tree planting, bus shelters, permeable materials in public projects, things we do all the time. Or the Outdoors for All Act was another one that we've been working on, like at the federal level. So that one would work to concretize a pot of funding for the National Park Service to buy land in urban areas for underserved communities that don't have access to open spaces. So these are the kind of bills that will come directly to your inbox that you can make 2 clicks to advocate for when you sign up for this tool. The next one is simply volunteer. There's really no need to reinvent the wheel. Seek out organizations that are already doing this kind of work in your community. Could be a local, state, or a federal board, a local school, nonprofits. Really just, you don't really have to start from zero. Get involved first with organizations that are already doing the work. And then leading through considering non-traditional employment. This is one that occasionally ASLA talks about, but there's tons of vacant seats in departments of the environment or transportation departments, both on state and federal levels, that our tools and our problem-solving capacity actually lends us to being pretty good policy makers in these types of decisions. So if you're considering something new, this is always an interesting one and places you at a really important seat at the table to form policy as landscape architect. And then express yourself. Things like writing op-eds for your local paper, being a part of blogs or radio shows, even something as simple as introducing yourself to local news editors or climate reporters so that they know that you're a resource that they can reach out to about climate news or about new projects that are getting funded in your area. Building those relationships can be a really great way to kind of stay tapped into the news cycle. And then some key climate actions to take with your firm or organization. The first one is kind of a heavy lift, show off your work. So this one is intended to talk about hosting a site tour. I think anyone who's been practicing for a while knows the sad reality that a lot of policymakers still don't know what landscape architects are or what we do, or more importantly, how we can help. So doing something like organizing a site tour is one of the best ways to really show what we do, show rather than tell, right? Now, I would say that probably organizing with your local ASLA chapter would be the best way to do this so that you can kind of use your network, because it takes a lot of back and forth with legislative aides and switching times, and maybe you have a client presentation, but Aida can come step in for me instead when the person shows up. This one takes a little bit more organizing, but is a super effective way to build relationships with policymakers. The next one is to be a change agent. I straight up stole this one from Kate Orff because I loved it when I heard her say this a couple years ago at a different conference. But basically, use your projects as a way to change either one local, state, or possibly even federal code or policy that gets in the way of implementing your projects. I know that we always complain about these well-intentioned codes and regulations that means that we can't plant trees or we couldn't do permeable pavers or this and that. So really taking the opportunity to take your high visibility projects and run with them to change some of these things. These things do take time. I remember hearing Sieg Nielsen talk about wanting to use solar lighting on a project that wasn't connected to the grid in kind of an outskirt area of New York City, and Public Works didn't want to introduce a new type of light fixture to the ones that they had to maintain. She had to do a pilot project for 7 years to convince them that it was a good idea. And we're running out of time, so it feels like 7 years is so long. But pilot projects are also a really great way to kind of take the risk out for public agencies, because really their mandate is public health and safety. So if you can do a small pilot project first, that's a great way to change ordinances and code. Then there's follow the money. So basically all of these federal legislative bills that get passed, these acts, these laws, they almost always funnel down through a local agent. So find those local agents, take them out to coffee, figure out, how do you apply for things, let them know what landscape architects do so that when they're scoping these requests for proposals, they kind of have you in the back of their mind, or have us as a field in the back of their mind, so that things that we can bring to the table are part of these requests for proposals. This one is also kind of an intimidating one to start with, but a good place to start is the overview of federal procurement process, which is published by the Congressional Research Service. That's also a live link in the field guide if you wanted to check that out tomorrow when you download it. And then finally, one that's really important to me, I think that supporting employee mental health and well-being and having reasonable work hours is super crucial to building advocates in our field. I like to say that burnt out employees make terrible climate advocates. We just don't have the energy, right? You're burning the candle at both ends. So I actually think that being a leader and supporting these types of healthy work environments, and actually encouraging people to get involved outside of the office, encouraging that kind of culture is super important to building our capacity as a field. And then finally, with your community, with your local landscape architecture community, you can join a state chapter. ASLA does a really great job of advocating at the federal level, but it's really up to local chapters to advocate at the state level. There's probably at least 3 or 4 people per state chapter who've done national advocacy days, so they'd be great resources to get involved with if you're interested in state advocacy days. I know Dalton's going to talk a lot about that. California is a very active region for those events. And then being a champion, so either creating or helping champion your city or region's climate action plan. It's the worst when plans just sit on a shelf, and sometimes even with climate action plans, if nobody's following up on them, they don't always get implemented. So kind of being dogged about making sure that these policies actually are getting implemented in your regions. And then giving back. This was a really cool program that I had no idea about before I started working with the Climate Action Plan, which is that ASLA has a partnership with the National Park Service Rivers, Trails, and Conservation Assistance Program, which is also called RCTA, that essentially puts ASLA chapters in touch with RCTA project leaders to support community-based technical assistant grants for planning and design. So essentially, communities that wouldn't be able to traditionally afford design fees, this program is a community-based grant program that ASLA helps kind of connect chapters who might be interested in a park or a trail program with this federal program. So finding more of those resources is a great way to try to impact the communities that have traditionally been left out in a lot of the design work of our field. And then last but not least, I also stole this one from a colleague, organizing fora or meetings. So the story that inspired this one is essentially this colleague was working on a coastline project, and she was complaining about how there were so many regulatory agencies, so many stakeholders that they often actually have competing mandates. So it makes it really hard in our position where we're translating between them all. Simply just bringing them all to the same table, virtual or physical, and trying to get consensus around values and around projects can be a super effective way to kind of lower the barriers to implementation. We do that all the time. We translate between disciplines. Why not bring together the regulatory bodies too, go one step higher to build consensus and excitement about the types of climate positive design that we can bring. So all of those key climate actions that we just went over are kind of intended to be like tasters or provocations, ideas, ways that you can get involved. And if any of them sounded interesting, there's a whole toolkit in the field guide that you can download to get more information if you think that sounds interesting, but you're not really sure what the next step is. For example, if the idea of writing an op-ed sounded interesting, in Chapter 1, Engage the Public, there's a link to ASLA's public relations guidelines that will kind of help you understand how to craft a message or develop a communications plan, how to reach out to reporters. I was just amazed by how many ASLA resources exist in these really strange corners of the internet. So we took a long time to try to pull them all together in this document with live links. So definitely check those out tomorrow. And here is the URL if you are curious. One last plug before I introduce my colleagues. So that's going to be at asla.org/climate tomorrow morning after the general session around 9:30 a.m. So with that, I'm excited to turn it over to my colleagues. I kind of set the framework, and they're going to talk more about their journeys as climate advocates and tell a couple of really illustrative case studies that are pretty different, but kind of show the breadth of different ways that we can get involved in as advocates, as landscape architects. So with that, Aida.
Hi, so I'm from Florida, that state that just got hit with the second hurricane in less than 2 months. But fortunately, I'm from Miami, and we've been dodging major hurricanes for the past, couple of decades. So I'm going to be talking to you about my personal advocacy journey and really how I come through from diving deep into climate action, what it meant, how to get involved, engaging with a lot of the organizations that Sarah mentioned, and finally, an incredible advocate story for that. So I started probably getting really, really into climate action, I would say 6-7 years ago. And I'm not sure if I started probably as a result of one of these events that we have in Miami, which is, we call sunny day flooding, which is really just a exceptionally high king tide. And they happen in the fall, and they last about 2 or 3 hours, but the coastal areas flood. And it can be in a sunny day, you don't know, now they can predict them, but the coast just floods. So it's like very strange. Or perhaps it may have been like what we call these rain bombs. And again, it's not a storm, it's not a tropical depression or anything. It's just, these torrential downpours that happen for a couple of hours, and the city floods, and traffic goes wacko, and everything kind of stalls for a minute, and everybody keeps going. And these are not normal things. These are things we need to be addressing. So I started to really dive deep into trying to understand and educate myself on really what are the climate threats that Miami is facing, that we are facing in Florida right now. So the image on the left is the 2022 storm surge map. And it goes from the lighter blues to the darker blues. And what it's mapping is what would happen if we were hit with a Category 4 hurricane. What would the storm surge be, and what would be flooded? Well, that's a big part of our county. That's a big part of the area where we live in. So it isn't necessarily the coast that's going to get flooded. A lot of us are going to get flooded. So we need to start paying attention to these things. The second map is the surface heat island. These are the areas with intensive surface heat that we have in Miami-Dade County right now. Yes, we live in a tropical environment, but this is not right. This is not good. And unfortunately, these areas happen in a lot of the underserved communities, in a lot of the poor communities, the people who have a lot of health issues, that have income issues, that have, all of the textbooks that you hear about. These are just proven case studies in our maps. So I started to really get involved in this. And I started to figure out which were the organizations that were around us that were involved in climate change, such as the Nature Conservancy, Miami Waterkeeper, University of Miami, the Rosenstiel School of Marine Science, the FIU, Sea Level Solution Center, and started to get involved with them, attend their meetings. What are they doing? What's their purpose? Started to then understand the news media. Who are the reporters that are reporting on climate change? What are they reporting on? Let me meet them when I see them in these conferences. Let them, this is me, this is you, let's start to understand who the group who is passionate about the same things that I'm passionate about are around me. We started to get involved in these sessions that are put by other organizations. It can be the AIA, the Engineering Society, that bring in a group of professionals to all kind of brainstorm solutions for, housing or something. So we started to sit at that table and just promote our landscape architecture agenda with the other professionals and, started to meet other professionals that are in with the same interest as we are. We joined CLIO. We became official speakers of climate change through the CLIO Foundation. We started mentoring young students from the high schools that wanted to learn about climate change. We started getting involved in their sessions, their summer sessions. We joined the AIA. Why not? Started lecturing at the AIA about landscape architecture and climate change and adaptation and what we can do, nature-based solutions to, climate change. We started attending conferences that were not ASLA, AIA, Waterkeeper Solutions, any other conferences, just starting to make our presence be known in our community and started to be seen as people who not only care, but, are knowledgeable about these issues. Engaging, as Sarah said, social media. And I run a small office. We're 12. We have very little time for social media with our projects, but anybody can just go in there and, upload a picture. What are you doing? I really encourage all business owners, allow your employees the time to be advocates. Encourage them to be advocates. Pay them for that day to go out and march for climate change. In the second picture, we see, some of our staff members. Aurora sitting in the front edge. They went out there and measured the water salinity for the Sea Level Solution Center. Just one day of measuring water. It's important to be really at the table, to be really seen as somebody who cares, not on paper, but really in presence. Find your team. We know that there's a lot of, collaborators out there, but there are those that will share the same passion you do. And so find your team, find the right collaborators, find your right coastal engineer that shares the same, your civil engineer, your biologist that, you can share ideas because a lot of the things are new things. They're not written yet. We are writing those now. So now let's go into the advocacy portion. So the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers was tasked with conducting a study of how to reduce coastal storm risk in Miami-Dade County. So they issued a tentatively selected plan in 2021, and what they proposed for Miami was some flood walls. And of course, this plan goes against everything that is right for planning, anything that Miami is trying to develop of connecting people to the water, bringing the disadvantaged communities to the water, our interaction with the water. So we were hired at that point because we were there at the surface, we were hired by the Downtown Development Authority, landscape architect, colleague, friend, who said, hey, we need to come up with some alternative solutions for these walls. You know, we can't have these things. So we were tasked on. This was in August of 2020, middle of the pandemic. Everybody working remotely, everybody. This is a time when we're still washing the vegetables outside before we bring them in, okay? And the DDA says, well, I don't have much money, Aida, and you need to come up with these ideas in 2 weeks because we have to write this letter for the mayor to. So it's not like they give you many options either, but this is really an amazing opportunity. So it's like, okay, great. You know, it's not like we were doing anything, but yeah, sure, we'll take the task. So we started with our task. So for those of you who are not familiar with Miami, Miami is vibrant. Miami is sexy. It's water, it's light, it's people, it's food, it's dancing, it's multicultural, it's sailing, it's kayaking, it's boating, it's everything that it's slated to be. And it's being promoted like that. We are a tourist destination. So we started to think about these wall proposals, alternative wall proposals. And one of the things that it dawned to us is like, okay, so this plan had been released the draft had been released in 2020. We are in August of 2020, and nobody has picked up on these walls. Nobody has said anything. Why aren't people outraged about these walls? Well, the lay person can't visualize a 20-foot wall on the waterfront. That's what we found out. And in pandemic, I think they're probably worried about other things than a 20-foot wall. So we said, we need to illustrate these things. In addition to finding the solution, we need to show people how wrong this is. So this is an example. This is Bayfront Park, one of our few waterfront parks. And this is the wall that the Army Corps is proposing for Bayfront Park, okay? Miami, it's a poor community, money for maintenance of parks is very little, so surely graffiti is a, canvas for graffiti. So we came up with, why are we putting a wall in front? Why don't we do living shoreline? Why don't we do something different? Okay? So there are solutions for the problems that are not a wall. So this was our alternative solution for that particular space in the wall. So this is the Brickell Bay Drive Promenade. And the city right now is undergoing a reconstruction project for Brickell Bay Drive to enhance the promenade and, do some, resiliency and floodwater protection in this area. Like many municipalities, it takes a little bit of time for the project to get off the ground. But this is the wall that the Army Corps is proposing. Okay? So, interestingly enough, this picture went viral. This image went viral. This image made the New York Times. This image made every newspaper in Miami. This image caught the news and the eyes of all the politicians. What? A wall? There? A wall there? Yes, that's the wall. That's the study. In the appendix, it says where it's going to be located. In the appendix, it talks about how high it's going to be. It doesn't have to be this way. Well, they hadn't thought that, there's flooding coming from inland too, so where's that water going to go? Is it going to get trapped in the wall? Is it going to, how is that going to work? You can do this. It's a hybrid solution. Yes, we have to have a bulkhead. Yes, we have to have a living shoreline. Maybe we have to have some spoil islands like the ones you see in the back. But can you imagine the impact of that wall in our community? Like, not only is it ugly as hell, but our people that, we're going to, sail or walk around at night and, the connections to the water, everything that's been taught in all the books, everything that we say of, it just goes by the wayside. So this is, part of the, the wall with this is the mouth of the Miami River. Navigable river. We have many projects along the river. We're working on one, adaptation, all kinds of the bulkhead and the pervious pavers and, all kinds of things for flooding. But nope, we're gonna get a wall. We're gonna get a wall right there, and right there adjacent to a development, a multi-million-dollar development. Of course, the developers weren't paying attention because they hadn't visualized the wall. Now they pay attention. Oh, this wall? Well, where's this wall coming from? Again, right there. So it's a hybrid solution. Maybe we need the flood walls at the mouth of the river, but maybe there's something else we can do also, that it doesn't have to be that way. So there we have. So this is kind of the bigger picture. This is the existing conditions. You can see the wall being illustrated just right against the shoreline. No thought about like 100 feet from the shore. No, right against 15 feet from the shore. So we worked with our colleagues engineers, the ones that we talked about, our team. We looked at, virtually we looked at, mappings because we didn't have time to do the research studies, the resource studies but we looked at mappings and see where we thought that there were resources, seagrasses, protected seagrasses. We respected the navigational channels. We looked at FP&L mitigation banks, and we came up with these spoil island solutions that not only would help and mitigate the coastal flooding, but would add 39 acres of parks to the city of Miami, which is one of the lowest per capita for parks in the country. I mean, isn't it? To me, it just seems like logical. But where's the logic? So, this is the news media when it went viral. Everybody now, oh my goodness, we can't have that. We can't have that. The mayor wrote a piece to the Army Corps. No, we cannot accept your tentatively solution. We need to have something different. You need to reevaluate it. You can't have this. We can't have this in Miami-Dade County. And guess what? Summer of this year, the Army Corps of Engineers rescinded that study and agreed to add $8.2 million and restudy how to mitigate flood and coastal flooding and coastal storm surge for Miami-Dade County. And we used our skills. It was a rendering of existing conditions, a rendering of proposed. More focus has been put on what they were proposing than the solutions. We must engage. We need to be advocates. I can't urge us enough. We have the skills, we have the knowledge. If you draw it. If you write it. Talk about it. If you dance. Sing, whatever it is, tap dance. You heard Sarah. The time to remain idle has passed. The UN Secretary 2 days ago said, we are on a highway to climate hell with our foot on the accelerator. Landscape architects, colleagues, let's put on the brakes. We gotta do this. Thank you. Dalton.
What did I get myself into? Trying to follow these two. Thank you, Sarah and Aida. Those are exceptionally difficult to follow, but I'm going to do my best here. My name is Dalton Lavoie. I'm a landscape architect practicing for Stantec in Sacramento, California, my whole career. And we're here today to talk about a success story I had a hand in, advocating for us as landscape architects in shaping local, state, and federal policies. So As advocates, I think it's really important that we're effective storytellers. And so if today's presentation is a success story, then what would that narrative be? So I put this graphic together hoping it'd be a little more engaging version of an agenda, and that's pun intended. I think it's important that any presentation start with why. So why am I here on stage speaking with you? What is our opportunity as landscape architects in the climate change discussion? You've seen some great examples already. And what voice do we have as climate change champions? I'm going to frame that entire discussion around a case study. And then really, if you're here for the CEUs, then you're going to want to pay attention during the meeting with officials 101. That's the part that's going to be on the quiz. So make sure you pay attention there. But we'll be looking at specifically when you go meet with legislators or policymakers, what do you want to talk about or be ready for? And we'd like to close with leveraging resources. Again, some that you've already seen presented here today, but how we as a relatively small group of professionals can amplify our voices and make big changes. So, like I said, any presentation starts with my favorite question, why? So why am I here spending this time on stage, 90 minutes with you? I think number one is to help you find your voice. We are all individuals, wonderfully unique and hugely capable of making a difference. And you're the only one, however, as much as this is about our opportunity and our voice, you are the only one who can control you. And you have to find your voice. What is your why? As Aida talked about earlier. So goal number 2 is breaking down the barriers. This can sound very intimidating. You're up here, Dalton, asking me to become an advocate and represent our entire industry in front of legislators to address one of the greatest existential threats ever to face humanity of our time. Are you serious? That's what you're asking. Tone that down a little bit. The stories that we tell our legislators are important as the stories we tell ourselves. And so making these asks achievable. Sarah mentioned mental health earlier. I think it's important that we level down, as important as this is, the expectations and take this in bite-sized chunks and figure out what we can do. So breaking down the barriers, I think, is really important. And then what we hope to do, if you weren't already fully inspired by Aida to go start doing renderings after this, is to inspire you to take action in whatever it is. If you write, if you dance. I thought she was talking to me. I don't dance. Maybe a couple beers, if you find me at one of the parties later, I might be. But so as much as I said, specifically, this presentation is not about me. I think the only way to tell an authentic story is to do it through your own voice. And so I want to share a little bit about my storyline. And the reason I do this is not to explain anything that I've done, but to lower the barriers for you, and so that you might find the barriers that we tell ourselves about why we do or don't choose to act. That's myself included. So if you're a college student in the audience, you might be interested to hear a story about in 2005 when this spiky-haired kid from Rockland, California, who didn't even know if he could grow a full beard yet, much less when it would turn gray, it was about 3 years ago, in case you're wondering, decided, who was raised on public assistance, who was raised by a single mother, and who got to go to Cal Poly on, sorry, I thought that might get me. Thank you to all the residents of California, by the way, for the last 38 years that helped me go to college, which is where I was going to go with that, and also, I love you, Mom. Who went to Cal Poly on Pell Grants and started learning about landscape architecture, started learning about sustainability, started joining clubs and seeing that we all on campus were trying to do the same thing, but with different voices. And you wonder what you can do, that maybe you'll do something like what I thought we might do, which was join together as the Empower Poly Coalition, a group of clubs on campus all trying to get a more sustainable university, join together under one voice, form a coalition, and get big things done on campus. We became one of the most powerful groups on campus, competing even with ASI for the university's attention on what the voice of the college were. And if you're a couple years out of school and your chapter is looking for someone to lead efforts to promote the discipline, I see some of the people in the audience recognizing themselves in the photo. And they ask you to help promote the discipline, and you're sitting there saying, what are you I'm not even licensed. How am I going to be the one that's helping our entire chapter talk to the public about what landscape architecture is? That you'll say yes. Because maybe something your chapter's doing, putting yard signs in front of our projects saying designed by a landscape architect, you might be crazy enough as a social media generation kid to think it could be a social public awareness campaign, and that it does get elevated and become something that helped our society communicate with millions. And if you're 4 years out of school and your president-elect decides they're moving to, Australia, New Zealand, and then they ask you if you'll step in and be the president-elect, and you barely even know how the chapter works, much less how to run it, that you'll say yes. Because in your chapter, I promise you, there will be people like Mark Truscott and Keith Wilson who took me under their wing and explained to me how to lead. And don't worry, we're going to speed this up. I'm not going to drag this thing out. But we're going to bring it home real quick here. And then if you're asked to represent your chapter at the state level and speak in front of lawmakers in Washington, D.C., that you'll say yes. Or you get the opportunity and privilege to represent your chapter as a trustee, as I have, and you get to go into then Senator Kamala Harris's office and ask their office to introduce the Living Shorelines Act, and they say yes, you're glad you did. So, or if you get your opportunity to work with your state, which is the case study for today, we're ready. Because it really doesn't matter where you are in your career or this country. What matters is your approach. I assumed all these roles with a huge degree of humility and without knowing exactly what I was doing. I'm wearing the pin that says it. And with some serious doubts about whether or not it was even possible, whether I could. But I leaned on others to help me, and I did it for the greater good. Note the formatting of the slide. Bold for why I did it, for the collective, not bold for what I did. And note that when I said the opportunity comes, we're ready, not I'm ready, because my voice is built on all those voices, and they've come to me and can be heard again through me, and we did it together. So my storyline, and the storyline you'll hear here today, comes actually through public awareness, is how I found advocacy. I've been doing public awareness for our chapter since it started at the ASLA. I think I'm one of the few that are still doing it for the chapter after all these years. But we started with a voice that was designed by a landscape architect, which talks about who we are, right? Calling attention to who we are. It evolved into, this is landscape architecture, which is talking about what we do. And then eventually, again, advancing on the narrative, talks about, we came with life grows here, which is why we do it. And every advocacy message should be about why. And I believe that our opportunity in climate change has its own unique and authentic why voice. In the campaign, we said, as landscape architects, we design places and experiences for life to grow and flourish. We design for human existence together with life on Earth in a field that combines art and science. We have natural communities, human communities, physical life, the memories of the past, and visions of the future. That's our social or cultural life. When those two mix and balance in the spaces we create, this is why we do our work. And beyond just saying why, an invitation to our communities, to our clients, and our world to collaborate. Let's grow together. And I want to do a brief barrier-lowering interlude on this concept for Life Grows Here too. At the LA ASLA conference, that concept was dry erase marker on a hotel room window that when me and my good buddy Drew, who's sitting in the audience here today, thought it, I think it was Sunday at the convention, and we were all amped up, but still thinking this is a conference of landscape architects talking about landscape architecture to other landscape architects, and why, in my public awareness hat, should the general public care? Or why do they care? And that's where Life Grows Here came from. Let's Grow Together came from. You already know us. We're already in the spaces you create. You might have been married in one. You probably bring your kids to play in one. You run your dog in one. We're already a part of your life. Life grows here. We care about the balance of human life and the natural world together. That is our own authentic and unique voice as professionals, and one that I think is very important in climate change advocacy. Another one came to me through attending a conference, which was this whole notion as climate positive design champions, because whether we realize it or not, we have not only an authentic and unique voice, but also an empowering and optimistic one, beyond net zero or carbon neutral to climate positive, because we know and can measure that our work ultimately can sequester more carbon than it emits. Climate positivity is a message that we can be the champions of. And the word champion is important because as landscape architects, we're often referred to as a shade-loving species. We don't seek the spotlight. And I think climate change is an issue where we emerge finally and admit that it's actually kind of true, because we're going to plant all the trees that are going to get all the carbon and we're going to be fine. But in all seriousness, it's important that we lead and that we get out front and we make a difference. So as part of this case study, which is the setup, all that I promise I'll loop back in, the case study we did was advocating for landscape architects with the California Natural Resources Agency, who after the governor recently reelected, Governor Newsom, passed his executive order for 30% of state lands to be conserved, state lands and ocean lands, to be conserved by 2030 for two reasons: to bolster economic growth, life grows here, and to also reduce the state's carbon footprint, climate positive design. Straight from the words of the press release and the rationale for our state undertaking this massive effort. I'll note the 30 by 2030 now adopted at the national level as well by the Biden administration. Having two storylines that we authentically as landscape architects can speak to. So a key point in how we were able to be effective in the state of California is that we have a coalition built, the California Council of the ASLA, which is comprised of the 4 California chapters. And what we do currently is bill tracking, which is look at what to watch, support, or oppose key legislation that comes out at the state level. We have, and I'll note who we are, a volunteer board of directors, which are made up of 2 representatives from each chapter. This is the folks that have been involved in the last couple years, as well as a paid executive director and a paid lobbying firm. And I'll note, listen for that later. We're going to close the loop on that comment of why I'm highlighting the volunteers versus paid. So when the opportunity came up, we found out through one of our directors that this executive order had been published, and we were able to use our lobbying firm to get a meeting with EGRS. And so now what? They're not the experts. They're able to get us to the table, but we need to develop our voice. So the first thing we did was did our homework. We read the executive order, and we highlighted where we as landscape architects see ourselves fitting in. We used Mural to collaborate. As Aida mentioned, we were all Clorox wiping our oranges and bananas at the time. I'm not even sure how healthy that was. But we had to find a way to collaborate and meet with this agency, even though the whole world was shut down, on something that's very important. So this all came together very quickly. I think we had maybe a couple weeks at best to get our presentation together, and we developed our voice. This is back in 2020. We're talking about our voice as climate champions when we introduce ourselves to this agency. Luckily, they already knew who we were. One of them happened to have like a roommate that was a landscape architect in college, so she was just already about it. And so we had a very receptive, also California, receptive agency to talk to when we showed up. And we said, in fact, this executive order sounds like it was written by landscape architects. We identified key elements of the executive order, line by line, and referenced them to the resources that we had, including the climate positive design tool, So it was talking about a carbon neutral economy in the executive order, and we said, we'll do you one better. How about climate positive? How about landscape architects are involved in finding and communicating and quantifying that the state's approach can actually be climate positive, not just neutral or less bad. We also highlighted the Sustainable Sites Initiative. We said, hey, the state has a standard for LEED Silver. Did you know that the Sustainable Sites Initiative exists and that we're certifying and quantifying ecosystem services to enhance and measuring how we can enhance biodiversity with our projects? How about something like that for the state of California as a requirement or an incentive? We also knew that this agency was the lead agency for setting the state policies, and we said, and we're aware of, did you know that the group that we represent, the ASLA, already has smart policies for a changing climate document that you can pull from, that you can get ideas for the policies in our state, and that we've already made recommendations at the federal level with the Biden-Harris administration recommendations that the ASLA put together. We also brought examples. We're having to put this together really quickly, who's available to meet with them. We're able to pull down examples of award-winning climate action work that's being done by using the ASLA award winners. We're able to bring in, Lucas Shellhammer was also able to come and present some of the work that he was doing for the Santa Clara Valley Open Space. So we're able to share as constituents, either whether you're meeting with a legislator or a state agency, or either residents of this state or a constituent in your district, this is the work we're doing, it's important to us, and be able to demonstrate how our work is doing what this executive order is asking us to do. We're already there. These meetings are short. If you get the opportunity or choose this path in advocacy to meet directly with these folks, it's important to have your ask ready. And so we were ready from the beginning on the mural board to, if we had to skip to specifically, all right, guys, what do you want? We knew what our answer was. Include climate positive design approaches, requirements or incentives for climate positive design. Include requirements or incentives for the Sustainable Sites Initiative. Review the blue ribbon policies and see which ones we can bring in as part of this action plan, and to consider us a resource. And we saw immediate response positive because they asked for a follow-up meeting, not only to hear more about our recommendations, but also on other topics like fire-wise planning, extreme heat mitigation, and where, as Aida had mentioned, and Sarah as well, where might there also be policies in place in this state that are just getting in the way of good work, that we could do better if we just didn't have these things in the way. And so we were able to get a meeting with them following up to talk about these issues. And when the strategy came out, I wanted to highlight a few that were included. We're not going to go through all of them. I'd love to get to Q&A. But that a few were including some very important ones and very specific ones. Increase the number of climate smart properties that are site certified, and consider adopting this certification program into capital construction programs. That's in the state's first ever climate action strategy approach. And also, for climate positive design, this is talking about financial incentives for nature-based climate solutions, including incentivizing urban landowners to undertake climate smart management actions, such as creating urban landscapes that sequester carbon, use drought-tolerant landscapes, and also protecting large established trees. These are right in line with a climate-positive design approach. Our work is by no means complete. Advocacy is a story and a train that you are always on, and it never ends. You are always be an advocate if you become one. And I would say that all of us, whether we realize it or not, are already advocates. You might think it may be imposing to get up there and speak on this topic in front of the folks that these legislators or agencies, but what you'll find is that the training you had in school and that you have in practice, you are already pre-qualified to be a climate change advocate, and you can do this today, now. So we're gonna need your help. That's the key. Right now we're setting up meetings to meet with legislators. These are just recommendations, and that's the goal of an effort like this, is to get these recommendations in place so that when we go meet with the legislators, we can take a leap that is actually a little bit farther beyond than we have to date. We've been tracking, supporting, and opposing legislation. Now we're looking for legislators to introduce it, which is, we're gonna need help. So The very first ask is that, it's not on the slide, but I need you all to move to California. It's really nice out there, in case you didn't notice. Everybody whose badge got scanned on the way in, Governor Newsom's gonna send you a personal invitation. You're coming to California. Join us. Not really. We need you where you are. We need you to be advocates in the state where you live. So educate yourself, number one. Find these documents, the couple of them that we shared a couple years ago with this agency, they exist. You can read them today. The Climate Action Guide and Field Guide are releasing tomorrow. Download them, read them, 9:30. We talked about this. Join the advocacy website for ASLA. And actually, if you didn't get maybe you haven't been paying attention to emails yet, but if you had joined, you'd know that the Biden-Harris administration just 3 days ago, while we were maybe traveling to get here, announced a roadmap for nature-based solutions to fight climate change, to strengthen communities, and support local economies. This is Kamala Harris, the same one that introduced the Living Shorelines Act in the White House, putting money, real money, towards these strategies so that we can join with other groups, the AIA, engineers. It's going to take all of us. I work in a multidisciplinary firm. I would never be the one to disparage these other disciplines. We will do it all together. We must do it all together. It is important that landscape architects are at the table. It is important that our colleagues in other disciplines are at the table and that we do it together. I'd encourage you, we're here in San Francisco. It's just the beginning of the conference. We have 4 days. Build your networks. It's very important that you do. Some of the people in the audience here have much larger networks than mine. I'm looking at you, Kona. And some of you are just getting started, maybe a student here. And the reason it's important is because it was 15 years ago that still spiky-haired kid was a recent Cal Poly graduate here at this conference in San Francisco, just starting to build mine. I want you to make sure that you're forming coalitions. Get out there, meet the people in the other agencies, meet the groups in your, like Aida was mentioning, the people in your community that are already doing this work. The Empower Poly Coalition at Cal Poly. Bring these groups together. Our collective voice is much stronger than any individual voice. We can't, and we know, as a small discipline, we don't have limitless resources, but we can join with agencies that do. We can combine our resources and amplify our voices by taking our shared desires, our dreams, our goals, combining the resources and doing it together. Hire a lobbyist. It sounds really weird, but hire a lobbyist. If you're going to do it, I'll just say, make sure that ASLA has guidelines on this thing. It can, the word lobbyist has a connotation, doesn't it? But for our group, really what they're doing is helping us understand how the state legislature works. When is it important that a bill is or isn't actually going to survive? Should we be worried about it? Is it just a shell bill? Is it actually going to evolve into something else? Is it even going to make it through committee? So that's the type of work that they're doing. They're not necessarily out there lobbying for it, like taking people to dinner or anything, right? They're just out there monitoring the legislation and telling us, educating us, practitioners, people with lots of work to do in our regular job, and helping us guide our volunteer efforts. Support your chapter efforts. I know the CPC and BOT just ended. That's our national leadership stuff that happens right before the convention. And I know, having participated in these, that there's never a CPC or BOT that goes by that we're not lamenting that we need more volunteers. And even at the state level, on some of the stuff we're doing, we need more volunteers in order to make these policy recommendations into real, actual legislation. So support your chapter's effort. Find out how you can help. Even if you write, you write. If you dance, you dance. Like, find a way to help. Visit asla.org. Find out more about what's going on in your state, and I don't think we do it enough, but I'm going to say it. Please join, if you haven't already, the American Society of Landscape Architects. If your registration is due for renewal, make sure you take care of that. And make sure that you join, because as I mentioned earlier, the CCSLA is made up of volunteers and a paid lobbying firm and a paid executive director. Without the dues, we can't support or have the success story I'm presenting here. It's very important that we all continue to support our society, that we make sure that we support our local efforts, and that we all take the initiative to be active in this fight. So before we get to Q&A, and you come up and ask your questions, we actually have an ask for you. which is where do you see yourself contributing? Whether it's in your community, your profession, for the state, for our country, or the world, because the actions that you take, that we take today, now, will shape the success that we all have in designing a better, I'll note, climate positive future for ourselves and for future generations. Thank you.
Testing. We good? All right, I think we're gonna turn the mics on the floor, and we wanted to keep this really casual, conversational. We threw a lot of information at you, but we have some really incredible resources up here if you had any questions specific to their advocacy journeys or just about advocacy in general. While I wait for the first question, I was going to open it up to you guys. You mentioned that advocacy is a train that never stops, right? So you both presented some really incredible success stories, but they don't end there. So what are the next steps? What are you looking to advocate for, now that that chapter is finished?
Well, I can start with mine. The Army Corps has started their charrettes again in Miami. As their study is going on. And of course, I found out there was no landscape architect on that board, on that team coming to Miami to look at these things. But we're at the table, we're there. So we are working behind the scenes through the county, who is the main entity that is coordinating the work, to let them know that it is important that a landscape architect be at the table. The city of Miami just passed a resolution through our advocacy work that requires a landscape architect to be on the team when projects are dealing with stormwater and flooding. So we are asking through the city of Miami, which is the main municipality that's going to be affected because it's the one on the coast. So we're asking through the city of Miami to the county that they implement that itself. So that's the first ask that we're working on right now with the Army Corps. And the second ask, as a result of the Climate Action Plan, is we would like to see their carbon emission and their carbon footprint on their walls. So we are asking for that. And that's where we are right now. It's just still going.
Yeah, I would say really looking to getting sites approved at the state level is a big ask. And it also comes with a lot of, as LEAD did, comes with a lot of considerations, we'll call them. Whether it's a incentive, an equal, or a regulation, a forced regulation, is something that I think these agencies are very interested to hear more about and would want to understand before they make their final recommendation. It's also something that any legislator introducing it wants to understand, because we want to see, obviously business-friendly policies. We're not trying to scare anybody out of the state, but we want to see that these investments are made wisely. And so I think we're in good shape, but it's going to take more work. So really getting something like that actually passed at the state level, I think, would be a top priority.
Thank you, guys. Am I on? Yeah? Okay. I had, two questions. One is, you guys threw a lot of pretty heavy statistics around. I think that's actually one thing about working in landscape architecture is the weight of the statistics. But I'm curious, maybe if you could speak to optimism around that, in addition to the work that you're doing. And the second question is, you guys all spoke about work that you're doing in advocacy that's outside of your day job. And I'm wondering if you could speak to thoughts or experiences on bringing advocacy, or how moving the needle within the firm as well as outside the firm? Thanks.
I thought the question about the heaviness of numbers was really good, and I contemplated not starting my portion with those carbon numbers, but I think that actually that's what underlies the urgency that keeps me really motivated is the problem. But as far as, not always operating in this negative space, I think it's really important to celebrate the wins. From your project work, I just had my first built project, which is a stormwater park in Arkansas, get built. And it's a tiny thing. It's going to help, 1.5 million gallons of water from going downtown. But I'm so excited about it. And I think just like really basking in that one win and letting those wins kind of infiltrate and not always focusing on the big picture, which sometimes can be hard given what we do. So really finding those moments of joy, because I know that park is going to impact people's lives. And I already see on Google Maps people, posting their pics of their kids that are on the teeter-totter. And I think not always getting caught up in the big picture is important for sustaining that kind of joy. I don't know if that.
Yeah, I think that's a good one. For me, if I focus on the numbers, it's depressing. And what brings the urgency to me is just what's happening in our community. I mean, 2 hurricanes in less than 2 months. I mean, it's just like we're tired of running out and, making sure the batteries work, But once again, the little wins that Sarah mentioned, the fact that the city of Miami will now require landscape architects to be on the project for stormwater projects that have traditionally been gray. That's a big win. Even that little swale, as you say, so it's the little wins that appear little that give us hope that we can do this. Being here, seeing all of you, we can all do it. We all have the power to do it. So I just think we need to, get with it.
Yeah. Or just to add one more thing, I think just building your networks, like who's your climate squad, that gives me hope when I see you and you and you and you in the audience and we talk about these things offline and we give each other energy, like that to me also gives me hope because you're operating in a different geography and you're operating at a different scale. I think the relationships that we build is also so crucial.
Yeah, I think the numbers can be daunting. I think the narrative that we can be climate positive is especially uplifting and unique to landscape architecture. Think about that. When you enter any of these rooms, we might be talking with architects about net zero. We might be talking about carbon neutrality. And landscape architects get to come in and talk about, well, you guys pull that off and then we'll take us to the positive side. Because really drawdown is what's going to be needed, not just less bad. Right? And so landscape architects are uniquely positioned to deliver that message because we're helping in that discussion. We are uniquely helping in that discussion. So as landscape architects, I find that incredibly empowering coming into any room where a discussion's happening. As far as within the firm, I find myself actually trying to catch up less than try and lead. There's incredible things happening within the firm on this. Stantec's known around the world as a leader in sustainability and advocating and doing climate change projects. So I think it's more getting involved and making sure landscape architects are present in the discussions. There are very, very, I'd say, technical, but also inspiring discussions happening weekly in the firm around embodied carbon and how to measure it. There's entire groups that go out there and that's a service. They help clients understand how they can reduce their carbon budgets or how they can actually deliver on becoming carbon neutral. I'm trying to get in there and be like, and then when you talk to them, bring the landscape architects and we'll talk about how they can be climate positive. And we can actually advance the discussion beyond just less bad and into good. And landscape architects, I think, have that good.
And what about your work outside of the office? Is that purely your volunteer time, or does Stantec also support these kinds of advocacy efforts with, I don't know, this is getting really into the weeds, but like, is there a billing code, or do you have a day a month? That kind of thing, I think, is part of what the question was trying to get at.
Yeah, coming here, I mean, I don't know if there's a day a month, but there are 100. If you are active in any, doesn't matter what discipline you are, if you're active within the organization that is the main organization or supporting organization for your discipline, they will support it. You get paid. You actually get to go do this. Anything that that's not already covered by being a speaker, because I'm going to advocate for you all being speakers someday. Please come up here on stage, join us. Do that. Make that part of your career path as well. It's important, but the rest is covered. The financial burden's lifted. There's definitely support for being an advocate within the firm, and I think it's also important that all firms do support, the whole mental health. I saw Todd look at me when that one came up, because he knows that I work too much already, and then I volunteer on the side after that. So Todd and I looked at each other on that one. I think it's if you care. I won't say that, and I'll be open. I'll talk with anybody about this too. That I've had. It's been a problem, and it's if you spend that much time dedicating to all these things, they mean a ton to my heart, and I think it's really important. It's how I've been able to make it through, but it's also, it can be, at some point you can burn yourself out. So I am a huge advocate as a leader in the firm of making sure no one else does what I did. And so I protect them like they're my children, saying, do not take on this burden, because it's what happened to me. And through no one telling me that it was my burden, but just something I did. That's my own narrative, the stories. I mentioned a storyline that you tell yourself about what this is taking, or is it really taking? So that's important. I think I'll talk with anybody about mental health if that's something you're struggling with. I think it's important that it's discussed openly on the stage and when we talk about it in our professions, because to be honest, it's a huge problem. And it's not just mine. It's a problem in our we're service-oriented professionals, right? We have clients. I bust tables was my first job ever. I feel like it didn't change that much. Like, the client's still always right, and even if I did it right, it's still wrong, and they want taken off their bill. So, I think it's important to discuss it. I laugh about it all the time. I make tons of jokes. I tried in the presentation. I don't know if they landed. But that's how I lighten the mood. It's heavy. A lot of this stuff is really heavy. So you got to lighten the mood and try and see the bright side, or at least see the humor in the craziness. And so that's a little bit about how I deal with it. That was a long answer, sorry.
Yeah, and Aida, real quick, and then we'll get back to the questions. You kind of touched on that in the presentation. Did you want to elaborate at all?
I did. We're a small firm, but I encourage all of our employees, our colleagues. I mean, just if there's a march, you want to go march, go. We'll pay for the day. I mean, the day. I mean, we'll pay for the day. I mean, and everybody's responsible for their hours, for what their work is doing. We're all adults. We know we have deadlines and commitments, but we support getting involved. We've paid people to become Clio speakers. We encourage people to go out and talk to others, to lecture, to participate in other events. So we actually are encouraging. Actually, what we're finding is that we're getting more work out of that. So if anything, it's a marketing strategy. So that's how we handle it.
Hi, thank you so much. I want to preface this question with the fact that this question comes from a place of hope. I think hope is seeing things with eyes wide open and trusting that we can get better. So, as good as intent may be, intent does not always equal impact. What are ways you see climate advocacy becoming co-opted and resulting in harm, particularly unintentional harm? So, for example, paternalism or racial and economic harms. Yeah, that's my question.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think when we focus just on carbon, we tend to erase these other really complicated, really important narratives about place, about people, about justice. And I think I'm really proud of the work that we did on the Climate Action Plan that's coming out tomorrow, because it does talk a lot about carbon and the numbers, but it's just as much about lifting all boats, about respect and equity, about, how do we work with communities so that this kind of stuff doesn't happen, and you build a green street, a green boulevard, and you displace everyone who used to live in the neighborhood. I mean, policy has to be a part of the equation, I think, and that's why we're so passionate about advocacy, because we do a lot as designers, but we don't do everything. We have to also be advocates in the policy realm, having city planner colleagues and friends that are part of this equation, because I think that you're right, just focusing on the green solution, maybe more than co-opting, it tends to shut out other really important discussions that can really alienate people, often people who have the most to gain from these types of projects. So I think just being in network with people who are coming at it, especially from the policy angle as well, is super important to not lose sight of that. Do you guys want to add?
I think that's great, Sarah.
Yeah,
Nailed
when I saw Aida's renderings for the first time, because I hadn't seen them actually until we got on this panel together, I couldn't help but think of the highway policies when all the highways were built, and I was like, are we about to do it again with climate responsiveness? So I think it's important the work Aida is doing, having a much broader and more complete discussion about place. I think, like you said, when we focus on carbon, I always had a problem with LEED because I just felt like it was like Weight Watchers for buildings. It's just skinny buildings that use less energy, but what happens when energy's clean? Then what? So that's why I think as sites and other and other certifications or measuring tools for how well we're doing our designs come up, I think it's important that the discussions are much more holistic about the entire place and the community, ultimately the community that it impacts, not just whether or not it floods.
So I think this question is related. It's about coalitions, which I heard you guys talk about a little bit, and I was wondering if you could expand on what groups you've worked with. Have you established formal coalitions with other groups? What groups? How have you done that? Like, especially in California, I heard all the work that ASLA California is doing, and I'm wondering if you're working as a coalition and who's put some thought and work into that.
Yeah, our CCSLA, the coalitions we're building, I'd say, are with these state agencies. But being honest, quite honest, not a lot of additional coalitions have been built. If I'm speaking candidly, there is a need for more volunteers. We need more people. We were all working through COVID. We were all adjusting our lives, and on the other side of it, there's tremendous opportunity, and we need more volunteers. It's even if it's just you'd be surprised how small the gap is between success and failure on some of these efforts are when it's just like the person who needed to do it is just toast, or we were going to have a presentation but someone got sick, and then the meeting doesn't get rescheduled, or it pushes 3 months. So I would say the coalitions are there. If you look in the climate smart strategy for the state, there's a laundry list of the groups that are doing great work. So in many cases, they're already laid out. If you go to your state's natural lands management agency or whatever it may be in your state, they're usually linking to who their allies are, and that's a good place to start.
So not to raise the level of debate, but I come from a state where at least a dozen communities will need to be relocated, coastal communities. There'll be low-income indigenous communities. And I wonder, Miami is so this is mostly for Aida. Miami is a great, wonderful, vibrant city, but when you go there, everything is right there on the coast. Has there been any thought or any look that maybe reducing density, maybe reducing some of the high-endness of those locations. Any thought to recovering some of that land?
No. No, and that's my sense of urgency. It's like, we're seeing these disasters happening next door, and we're still building on the coast. I just, sometimes I wonder, it's like, well, maybe what we need is a big hurricane here so that everybody understands what's happening. I don't know what's going to happen. It's not there. I think we need more volunteers, and I think we need more legislative action. And I think maybe that's going to be my next take after I, delegate the wall to somebody else to go fight that wall and then go back and, do some action, because I think we need to think about those things. And our neighborhoods are gentrifying. The people are moving to the higher lands, and the entire coast is being developed with high end. And more and more and more. And our mayor is promoting more people to come because we're going to be the capital of, tech, the tech hub now, because we have the great climate. I don't have the solutions. I want, I think we just need to all come together, brainstorm, let's move forward. And I think that's where I found ASLA and being involved in ASLA very rewarding. Because I think that we're all in it in the same boat. It's just in different states, but we can share and collaborate and then, move forward. I guess that's my take on it.
If we're going to do a brainstorm, I did bring a dry erase marker. There's glass right outside. We could.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah. No, I think the policy is an important one. I think through I said my journey came from awareness to advocacy, because what I realized is that even if you're trying to make more things happen in the office, or if your office or firm is just all about it, it sometimes doesn't matter if your client isn't. And so actually advocacy and legislation is a place where it doesn't matter what your client wants anymore, because they have to. And as much as we maybe don't talk about it, a lot of our jobs, whether you're an engineer, an architect, or landscape architect, come through delivering for clients drawings, projects that are compliant with codes and policies. So advocacy is one of the best ways, actually, to maybe go around your client and get what you actually want to happen required. It's not just a good idea. And when we're talking about climate change, I think public health, safety, and welfare is at stake. And there's an argument to be made for that when you go talk with legislators, which is what they're going to want to talk about. So I think advocating, especially to get policies, or whether they're local, state, or federal policies, funded, established, those are great ways that you can maybe make the change that you don't have the ability to with your client or in your office.
All right, we got 3 minutes. Let's try to squeeze in the last 2 questions.
First of all, thank you all for the great presentation, and thank you for all the great work you've done. One of the things that occurs to me as a real success on your efforts was you sort of flipped the script with the Army Corps. You took them from being sort of them versus us to saying, to becoming a collaborator with you. And there's a lot of them out there. So my question is, how can we get to be recognized as collaborators with the energy companies, the government that doesn't want to change, the bureaucrat, all these different entities that seem to be barriers to us, like the Army Corps was for you? How can we get them to see the need to collaborate with us and get them to the table with us?
Well, I tell you, I think it takes a lot of work on our part, because we almost have to do kind of work ahead. But talking to them, for example, one of our biggest agencies, which is a roadblock, is the Department of Transportation. because of course it's all about cars. So, but working with them and talking to them in their language. Okay, so it's kind of learning their language, but talking to them about their language. And telling them that maybe if they put shade on the sidewalks, people would walk more and they would ride less and then less cars and da-da. So, but they make the sidewalks very narrow. But maybe if they put the right infrastructure for the tree to grow in the sidewalk, that tree would not crack the sidewalk and they would have to maintain the sidewalk. So in reality is kind of, it's narrowing down which agency you're trying to kind of tackle and learning their vocabulary and kind of turning the paradigm of their vocabulary to something that would be appealing to them.
And I think also remembering that agencies are made up of people. Like, I know that Texas Department of Transportation can be an adversary a lot of the time, but there are actually good people trying to do good work. Take them out for coffee. Ask them, you know, what is the roadblock on your end? How can we collaborate? Maybe it's offline and kind of a little bit under the table, or maybe it's starting something, you know, more official. I think it's easy to, like you said, have the us versus them mentality, but like finding those individuals is really critical too.
Yeah, the work that's being done inside state and federal agencies is largely driven by standards that are outdated and need to be updated for what we're talking about, and that is not an easy task. I've worked with DOTs and I do lots of work with state and federal agencies, and those things are baked in. And so I don't even know what that looks like. It's actually a really interesting challenge. Might have to look at that. Yeah.
All right, last question.
Okay, so thank you all very much. This is a really interesting topic. And I guess I just have a question, because we are landscape architects and we are in construction, and construction being the biggest emitter of carbon. How do we see us designing in the future to be carbon neutral on day one versus just trying to be carbon positive? And I only bring this up from a point of reflection. We took a parking lot, converted it into a park, and it's going to be 27 years before it's carbon positive, just because of the act of construction, demoing the parking lot, bringing in new materials, new walls, new soil, new all of this, right? So because of the industry we're in, how are we ever going to make a big impact on carbon neutrality?
Yeah, love this question, and we have 37 seconds. I think that the number one thing that I like to think about is that technology is always changing, and we have all these tools to do benchmarking earlier in the process. You're right, like demo is demo, and you're not going to be able to get around it. But the possibility for cities having, electric vehicle requirements for heavy equipment that's inside city limits, that could be a policy thing that changes. Or maybe your maintenance, your city outlaws two-stroke motors, and that's some maintenance cost that goes down. I think that it's up to us to really always be educating ourselves about how we can design better, and it's changing all the time. And let's continue that conversation on Sunday when we talk about how we're going to implement the Climate Action Plan. All right, thank you all.